Close your eyes for a second and picture a Saturday morning in July of 1978. The sun is already baking the pavement by 8 a.m. The ice cream van's melody is drifting down the road 3 streets over, and your mom has just pushed you out the back door with a single instruction that could not have been simpler. Be home when the streetlights come on. Nobody packs you a water bottle, nobody asks where you are going, and nobody hands you a mobile phone because that science fiction future is still 20 years away from your pocket. You are 6 years old, and for the next 12 hours, the entire neighborhood belongs to you and your mates. That was childhood across America, Britain, Australia, and Canada in the 1970s and 1980s, and if your parents tried even a fraction of it today, they would be sitting in the back of a squad car before dinner. What we are about to walk through is not a list of minor rule breaking. These are 30 things that millions of mothers and fathers did without a second thought. Things that were printed in parenting books, sold in department stores, and broadcast on government-approved public information films, and every single one of them has since been banned, criminalized, or turned into grounds for a social worker knocking on your door. So settle in, because we are taking the long way back through an era that raised us on benign neglect and somehow produced an entire generation that lived to tell the tale. Let us start where most childhood memories actually lived, which was the inside of a car that had more steel than sense. Number 1. Riding in the open bed of a pickup truck doing 65 on the highway. If you grew up anywhere rural in the States, Australia, or the back roads of Canada, you know exactly what this looked like. Dad throws 6 kids into the metal cargo bed of a Ford F-Series, tells you to hold on tight, and merges onto the interstate while you sit on the wheel well with the wind pulling tears out of your eyes. In Australia, they called the vehicle a ute. On the prairies, it was just called the way you got to the lake, and nobody in any country thought to ask whether a 40-pound child would survive a rollover at 55 miles an hour. The numbers on this are not gentle. Federal crash data comparing the late 80s and early 90s showed that occupants in the cargo area had a fatality risk nearly 3 times higher than front seat passengers, and almost 8 times higher when you compare them to someone actually wearing a seatbelt. And here is the part that genuinely surprises most people. This is not locked in the past. As of today, 20 American states still have no law against riding in the open bed of a pickup truck, including Alabama, Arizona, Idaho, Montana, Oklahoma, and Wyoming. Cross a state line on a family road trip, and what was perfectly legal 200 miles ago can turn into a child endangerment charge the moment you hit the border. Number 2. Sleeping in the back of the station wagon on a road trip to grandma's house. Every family in the Western world in 1976 had one of these, and every kid alive knew the sacred rule of long drives, which was that you fought your siblings tooth and nail for the ultimate prize, the wayback. That flat expanse of cargo space behind the rear seat of a Ford Country Squire, a Chevrolet Caprice Estate, or your Australian equivalent, where you could lay out like a starfish, stare up at the stars through the rear window, and sleep the whole way to Florida or Cornwall or the Gold Coast while your parents chain-smoked in the front. There were no seatbelts, no booster seats, and frankly no expectation that anyone would use a seatbelt even if they were installed. In the early 80s, fewer than 15% of Americans said they wore one regularly. Back in 1956, when Ford first offered seatbelts as an option, only 2% of buyers even bothered to tick the box. And of the 40,000 belts Nash Motors installed that year, only 1,000 were ever actually used. The only safety device that existed on those road trips was your mom's right arm shooting out across your chest when she hit the brakes, and that arm had been reinforced over the years by years of practice. Australia was the first country on Earth to actually do something about it. Victoria passed the world's first mandatory seatbelt law in 1970, with the rest of the country following by 1973. Ontario became the first Canadian province in 1976. Britain made front seatbelts compulsory on January 31st, 1983, with rear seatbelts for children following in 1989 and for adults in 1991. And the United States, which invented the interstate highway, did not get a single state seatbelt law until New York passed one in December 1984. Number 3. Babies riding home from the hospital in mom's arms, in the front seat. This is the one that genuinely stops modern parents cold when they hear about it. Until the late 1970s, hospital maternity wards across all 4 countries released brand new mothers directly into the front passenger seat of a family car with the newborn held in their arms. No car seat, no anchor point, no safety system of any kind. Dad would drive his wife and their 3-day-old baby home at 45 miles an hour, with nothing between that infant and the steel dashboard except the mother's own body. A portable bassinet might be wedged on the bench seat beside her if the baby was sleeping. That was the safety equipment. Tennessee became the first American state to require child car seats in 1978, pushed through by pediatrician Dr. Robert Sanders, who is now remembered as the father of child passenger safety law. Every other state followed by 1985. Today, every modern hospital in the developed world requires parents to demonstrate a properly installed rear-facing car seat before they will even discharge a newborn, and the distance between that requirement and the way your mother came home from the maternity ward in 1974 is about 50 years of regulation written in tragedy. Number 4. The toddler driving lesson from dad's lap. Before anyone had heard the term child endangerment, this was a bonding ritual practiced in every parking lot, dirt road, and empty country lane from Glasgow to Perth to Saskatoon. You sat on dad's lap behind the wheel of the family sedan, he worked the pedals, and you put both tiny hands on the steering wheel and pretended to drive. Kids old enough to remember the lesson, but too young to reach the pedals were the target demographic, which meant 2, 3, maybe 4 years old. Nobody thought about what the unpadded steel steering column would do to a toddler's chest in a 20-mile-an-hour fender bender, because nobody thought about it happening at all. Number 5. Leaving the kids in the parked car while you ran into the bank, the bar, or the grocery store. Summer afternoon, 1982. The parking lot of a supermarket in any one of these 4 countries. Mom leaves 3 kids in the back seat with the windows cracked an inch, says she will be right back, and disappears into the store for 45 minutes. You spent the time burning your thighs on scorching vinyl, playing with the manual window cranks, fighting your brother over who got to sit in the driver's seat, and watching the ice cream she eventually brought out slowly turn into soup in a shopping bag. This one crossed a cultural line sometime in the mid-2000s in most places, and the case that defined the new rules in North America was a Maryland family called the Métives. In December of 2014, and again in April of 2015, Danielle and Alexander Métive let their son Rafi, aged 10, and their daughter Devora, aged 6, walk home alone from a park about a mile away in Silver Spring, Maryland. Child Protective Services opened an investigation. Twice. Danielle Métive told reporters at the time that the world was actually safer than when she was a child, and all she wanted was to give her kids the same old-fashioned independence she had grown up with. CPS eventually cleared the family in June of 2015, but the investigation itself made national headlines because it crystallized the gap between how every parent raised a child in 1978 and what the state will now do to you if you try it in 2024. Number 6. Riding a bike, a skateboard, or a BMX without a helmet. Anywhere. Ever. Every kid on Earth in the 70s and 80s had a bike, and not one of them owned a helmet, because helmets for bicycles basically did not exist as a consumer product. You rode your Raleigh Chopper, your Malvern Star, your Huffy, your Schwinn, down steep hills and into traffic with nothing between your skull and the asphalt except a bad haircut and good luck. Head injuries happened constantly, but nobody connected them to the lack of protection, because protection was not a concept that had been invented yet. Australia is the country that changed this, and they changed it for everyone else too. Victoria passed the world's first mandatory bicycle helmet law on July 1, 1990. Helmet wearing in Victoria jumped from 31% in March of that year to 75% 1 year later, and insurance claims from cyclists killed or hospitalized with head injuries dropped 48% in the first 12 months and 70% in the second. A University of New South Wales study published in 2022 calculated that Australia's helmet laws have prevented an estimated 1,332 cycling deaths through 2020. Every other Australian state followed by 1992, New Zealand in 1994, and the rest of the world followed with youth-only laws over the next 2 decades. Britain, Canada, and the United States still have no national adult helmet requirement to this day. Let us move inside the house for a minute because the danger did not stop at the driveway. Number 7. Kids sent to the corner shop to buy a packet of cigarettes for mom. Handwritten note on a torn piece of paper. A $5 out of the tin. And a 7-year-old on a bicycle pedaling down to the newsagent to buy 20 Benson and Hedges for dad. No identification check, no raised eyebrow, and 9 times out of 10, the shopkeeper tossed in a penny sweet for the trouble. Cigarette vending machines sat humming in pubs, bowling alleys, restaurants, and grocery stores, and any child with a handful of coins could buy a packet without ever speaking to an adult. Britain's Children and Young Persons Protection from Tobacco Act did not raise the purchase age to 16 with real enforcement until 1991. Canada passed its Tobacco Sales to Young Persons Act in 1993. The American Sinar Amendment, which required states to actually enforce minimum age tobacco sales, only arrived in 1992. Number 8. Candy cigarettes, marketed to 5-year-olds, branded to look exactly like the real thing. This one is nearly unbelievable when you look at it with modern eyes. For most of the 20th century, tobacco companies authorized candy manufacturers to use their real brand names, so children in the 70s were walking around with little white sticks that said Marlboro, Camel, Lucky Strike, Winston, and Players printed on the wrapper. The red tip simulated a lit cigarette. Some versions were dusted with powdered sugar so you could blow a puff of fake smoke, and older kids practiced holding them exactly like their dad did at the dinner table. A study published in 1990 found that 6th graders who had eaten candy cigarettes were twice as likely to smoke real ones. A later adult survey of nearly 26,000 people found that 88% of current and former smokers had eaten candy cigarettes as children, compared to 78% of people who never smoked. Britain banned them. Canada banned them. Australia banned them. Ireland, Finland, Norway, Turkey, and a dozen other countries banned them. Only one American state ever tried, which was North Dakota in 1953, and they repealed that ban in 1967. Every other American attempt to outlaw them between 1970 and 1990 failed, and the descendants of those candies are still sold today under the rebranded name Popeye Candy Sticks. Number 9. Smoking on airplanes, in hospitals, at parent-teacher conferences, and in the car with the windows rolled up. The air in a Boeing 727 cabin in 1979 was, by modern standards, a public health catastrophe. Ashtrays built into every armrest, flight attendants walking the aisles serving coffee with one hand and emptying butts with the other, and a flimsy cardboard divider halfway through the cabin that pretended to separate smokers from non-smokers, while the smoke drifted freely into every row. Airlines started pulling the plug on this in stages. Australia banned smoking on domestic flights from December 1st, 1987. The United States followed with a ban on flights under 2 hours on January 1st, 1988, extended it to flights under 6 hours in 1990, and made it total in 2000. Canada went further, becoming the first country in the world to ban smoking on all flights operated by its own carriers in 1994. Britain's full British Airways ban did not come until 1998. Smoking in cars with children followed the same staggered pattern. South Australia went first in May of 2007. The rest of Australia followed by 2014. England and Wales banned it on October 1st, 2015, with Scotland following a year later. A Newcastle University study used to justify the British law found that even with a car window cracked open, levels of dangerous chemicals in the cabin were more than 100 times higher than recommended safety guidelines. Number 10. Pregnant mothers smoking and drinking through all 3 trimesters. Obstetricians in the 70s routinely told pregnant women that cutting back, not quitting, was enough, and a glass of wine at dinner was framed as good for the nerves. The term fetal alcohol syndrome was not even coined until 1973, when Jones and Smith at the University of Washington published their findings. The Surgeon General's landmark report specifically on the effects of smoking during pregnancy did not arrive until 1980, by which point millions of women had already smoked through every pregnancy for decades. Cigarette ads in women's magazines showed slim, glamorous mothers-to-be, and many doctors dismissed patient concerns outright. Number 11. giving children sips of beer, wine, and champagne at family gatherings. At a barbecue in 1984, in a backyard in any one of these 4 countries, you would watch an uncle hand his 9-year-old nephew a cold lager and laugh when the kid pulled a face. Christmas dinner at an Australian family table came with watered-down wine for the children. French-Canadian families offered diluted red wine from about age 6 onwards. British parents, protected by the Children and Young Persons Act of 1933, were allowed to legally give alcohol to children as young as 5 at home, and that law, astonishingly, is still on the books today. Secondary supply laws that now make it illegal to give alcohol to someone else's child without parental consent did not even exist in Australia until New South Wales passed one in 2007. About 29 American states now ban parents from giving their own children alcohol under any circumstances, and the rest allow it only under direct home supervision. Now we get to the toys. This is where modern parents really start to lose their composure. Number 12. Lawn darts. A game where both parents and children took turns throwing 12-inch long, steel-tipped metal projectiles high into the air, aiming for plastic rings scattered across the lawn, while other children played on the grass underneath. Jarts, as they were sold in America, were weighted to about a pound and hit the ground at nearly 90 miles an hour, with around 23,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. More than 6,000 American emergency room visits were logged between 1978 and 1986, and 81% of the injuries happened to children under 15. Half of those were to kids under 10. The story that ended the industry is a specific one, and it deserves to be told properly. On the afternoon of April 5, 1987, 7-year-old Michelle Snow was playing with dolls in her front yard in Riverside, California, when a lawn dart thrown by a neighbor's child sailed over the backyard fence and struck her in the skull. She was pronounced dead 3 days later. Her father, David Snow, an aerospace engineer at Hughes Aircraft, spent the next 18 months lobbying Congress and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. He told the Los Angeles Times at the time, "I want to get these damn darts. These things killed my child. I am going to get them off the market, whatever it takes." The CPSC voted to ban metal-tipped lawn darts in October of 1988, and the ban took effect before Christmas that same year. Canada followed with its own ban. In 1997, a 7-year-old boy in Elkhart, Indiana, died from an old set someone had kept in their garage, and a Canadian child died the same year from an American import, which prompted the CPSC to reaffirm the ban in even stronger terms. Number 13. Clackers, also called click-clacks or cure bangers. 2 heavy acrylic balls on a string swung rhythmically above and below your hand, producing that iconic clacking sound that defined playgrounds from 1969 through 1972. The problem was that acrylic, under repeated high-speed impact, eventually shattered, sending razor-sharp shards flying into the eyes, mouths, and faces of children standing 2 feet away. The American FDA imposed new safety standards in 1971 that pulled most of the original versions off shelves. In 1976, a federal court case with the wonderful name United States versus Ann Article, consisting of boxes of clacker balls, officially classified the toys as a mechanical hazard and authorized the government to seize them. As late as 1985, U.S. Marshals were still raiding warehouses in Phoenix, Arizona, seizing more than 4,600 clackers from a novelty company that had tried to sneak them back onto the market. Number 14. The Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Laboratory. In the early 1950s, a toy company in America sold a children's science kit, priced at $49.50, the equivalent of about $630 today, which contained 4 glass jars of actual uranium ore. Not pretend uranium, real automite, torbanite, uraninite, and carnotite, mined from the Colorado Plateau. The kit also came with a beta-alpha radioactive source, a pure beta source, a gamma source, a working Geiger counter, a Wilson cloud chamber, an electroscope, a 60-page instruction book, a government pamphlet called Prospecting for Uranium, and a comic book called Learn How Dagwood Splits the Atom, which was co-written by the actual director of the Manhattan Project, General Leslie Groves. The only warning printed in the manual was not a health warning. It told children not to remove the ore from its jars because the flakes would spoil the Geiger counter readings. Fewer than 5,000 kits were ever sold, and Radar magazine later named it the second most dangerous toy of all time. Lawn darts took the top spot. The chemistry sets that followed in the 60s and 70s had been watered down by that point, but they still contained real sodium cyanide, potassium nitrate, and acids strong enough to etch glass, and they were marketed to 10-year-olds with no goggles, no ventilation warnings, and no age verification at purchase. Number 15. The Baby Walker. A wheeled plastic frame with a fabric seat that let a pre-walking infant scoot across the kitchen floor at 4 feet per second, which is fast enough to cross a room and reach an open stairway before a parent could hang up the phone. American emergency rooms were treating more than 21,000 baby walker injuries a year at the peak in 1990, most of them from tumbles downstairs. The Canadian Hospital's Injury Reporting and Prevention Program documented nearly 2,000 walker injuries to babies between 5 and 14 months old over a 12-year window. Canada did something about it. On April 7, 2004, Canada became the first country in the world to ban baby walkers outright. The penalty for selling, importing, advertising, or even reselling one at a garage sale is up to 100,000 Canadian dollars or 6 months in jail. Customs officers seize them at the border. Health Minister Pierre Pettigrew announced the ban by saying that Canadians had to know about the dangers these products posed to infants and that the safety of children was of the most vital importance. The United States, Britain, and Australia still have not banned them. Number 16. Drop-side cribs. A crib with a side rail that slides up and down for easy infant access was the industry standard from the 1940s through the 2010s. Every nursery had one. Every second-hand baby store resold them. The design flaw was simple and deadly. Plastic hardware wore out over time, or parents reassembled the crib slightly wrong, and the result was a V-shaped gap between the mattress and the rail where a baby could become wedged and suffocate. At least 32 American infants died this way between 2000 and 2010, with another 14 suspected cases. The Consumer Product Safety Commission recalled more than 11 million cribs during that decade, and finally banned the entire design in December of 2010, effective June 28, 2011. The ban also covered resale, meaning the drop-side cribs stored in millions of grandparents' attics were instantly illegal to give away. Number 17. Children buying bangers, Roman candles, and bottle rockets from the corner shop for bonfire night. This one belongs to Britain more than anywhere else, although Australian, Canadian, and American kids all had their own version. Every November 5th, British children as young as 10 could walk into their local newsagent, plonk down a few coins, and walk out with a bag full of fireworks that today would require a professional pyrotechnic license. Jumping jacks were thrown at friends. Roman candles were fired from milk bottles in back gardens. Bangers got tossed into bins and puddles to hear them explode. The iconic Charlie Says public information films, voiced by Kenny Everett in the mid-70s, tried to warn kids about matches and fireworks, but most households watched them and laughed. Britain finally raised the legal purchase age to 18 in 1997 and banned bangers, mini rockets, aerial shells, and jumping jacks from public sale in the same act. The fireworks regulations of 2004 banned use between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., with exceptions for Bonfire Night, New Year, Diwali, and Chinese New Year. Australia went further and banned almost all consumer fireworks entirely, with only the Northern Territory allowing them on Territory Day, the 1st of July. The Australian Capital Territory banned every consumer firework in 2009. Now we come to the part of the era that defined it more than any other: the profound and unsupervised freedom. Number 18. Leaving a 6-year-old in the toy department while you did the weekly shop. Before July 27, 1981, this was ordinary behavior in every shopping mall from Melbourne to Manchester to Minneapolis. Adam Walsh was 6 years old that afternoon when his mother Reve left him playing an Atari video game at a kiosk in the Sears toy department of the Hollywood Mall in Florida, while she walked over to the lamp section. A security guard ordered a group of boys fighting over the kiosk to leave. Adam was never seen alive again. 2 weeks later, on August 10, 1981, Fishermen found his severed head in a canal 120 miles away near Vero Beach. His body was never recovered. The case was not officially closed until December 16, 2008, when Hollywood Police Chief Chad Wagner named drifter Otis Toole as the killer, though Toole had died in prison of cirrhosis in 1996. Adam's father, John Walsh, went on to host America's Most Wanted on Fox television starting in 1988, and the show helped catch more than 1,100 fugitives over its 25-year run. The Missing Children Act of 1982 finally forced the FBI to add missing children to its National Crime Information Center database. Before that law, a criminologist told NBC News that you could enter information about stolen cars and stolen guns into the federal database, but not stolen children. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children opened its doors in 1984, and Code Adam, the in-store alarm named after him, is now used in 70,000 department stores worldwide. Shortly after Adam disappeared, dairies across America began printing missing children's faces on the sides of milk cartons. Ethan Patz, a 6-year-old boy who vanished on his way to school in New York on May 25, 1979, was arguably the first face to appear. President Reagan designated May 25th as National Missing Children's Day in his memory. An entire generation of children stopped being allowed to walk to the corner shop alone, and a criminologist at Mount Holyoke later put it this way: "The aftermath produced a generation of cautious and afraid kids who viewed all adults and strangers as a threat and made parents permanently paranoid about the safety of their children." Number 19. Latchkey kids coming home to empty houses at the age of 6. The term goes back to the Second World War, but it exploded as a cultural category in the 70s and 80s. A 6-year-old came home from school, a brass house key hanging on a dirty shoelace around her neck, let herself into a silent, empty house, poured herself a glass of something questionable, watched 3 hours of cartoons, and was the sole human authority on the property until Mom got home at 6. Maternal workforce participation in the United States jumped from 47% in 1975 to 67% by 1990. The U.S. Census Bureau reported that by the early 2000s, nearly 6.9 million American schoolchildren, about 1 in 5 of everyone aged 5 to 14, were regularly left to care for themselves after school. About 40% of the entire Gen X population grew up as latchkey kids. The same pattern held across Britain, Canada, and Australia. Wherever both parents worked and affordable after-school care simply did not exist. Number 20. Walking to school alone at age 5, sometimes in -40-degree weather. This one hits differently depending on which country you grew up in. In Britain in 1971, roughly 80% of all children aged 7 and 8 walked to school alone. That number collapsed to less than 10% by 2010. The Tufty Club, run by the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents and fronted by a cartoon squirrel named Tufty Fluffytail, had over 2 million child members in the early 1970s, which tells you everything about how routinely 5- and 6-year-olds were expected to manage their own road safety. In Canada, the number was similar, but the temperature was different. Kids in Winnipeg, Edmonton, Thunder Bay, and Saskatoon walked a mile or more to primary school in temperatures that routinely hit -30 to -40. Today, Canadian schools close automatically when the wind chill drops past about -28. In 1978, your mother layered you up like an astronaut, opened the back door, and waved goodbye. The most disturbing British public information film ever made, Lonely Water from 1973, featured Donald Pleasance narrating a hooded Grim Reaper figure watching children drown in ponds and quarries, and it was shown to primary school pupils as routine classroom material. Utah became the first American state to pass a free-range parenting law in 2018, specifically because the Métis case had made ordinary childhood legally risky. Number 21. Sticking your thumb out on the side of a rural highway at 14, before Adam Walsh ended this practice across most of the Western world. Hitchhiking was simply how teenagers got to concerts, summer jobs, or a friend's house in the next town over. The Ted Bundy era, which ran from his arrest in 1975 through his execution in 1989, combined with the Green River Killer investigations and Australia's own backpacker murders carried out by Ivan Milat between 1989 and 1992, pushed hitchhiking from unremarkable into what were you thinking? Picking up a 14-year-old hitchhiker today will get you charged with child endangerment and possibly interference with custody. Letting your teenager hitchhike at all can trigger a neglect investigation. The medicine cabinet in 1980 was a horror museum in its own right. Let us open the mirror. Number 22. Mercurochrome and merthiolate painted on every scraped knee. Two bright red mercury-containing antiseptics that lived in virtually every medicine cabinet in the English-speaking world from the 1920s through the 1990s. Mercurochrome was developed at Johns Hopkins by Hugh H. Young in 1918 and sold by Eli Lilly. Merthiolate, which contained thimerosal, arrived a decade later. Both were painted directly onto open wounds with a tiny glass wand, and both stung like a blowtorch. The initial injury was nothing compared to the searing chemical fire of the treatment. You screamed. Your mother told you to blow on it. Then she sent you right back outside with a knee stained bright orange for the next 3 weeks. The FDA began reviewing mercury-containing over-the-counter drugs in 1980. On October 19, 1998, it reclassified mercurochrome from generally recognized as safe to untested, which effectively banned interstate sale in the United States. Thimerosal was pulled from American over-the-counter products the same year, and the CDC and FDA requested its removal from childhood vaccines in 1999, which was completed by 2001. Brazil banned it in 2001, Germany in 2003, France in 2006. Today, pregnant women are told not to eat swordfish because of mercury content, which is a policy that gets much stranger when you remember that the same chemical family was painted directly into open wounds on millions of children for 50 years. Number 23. Baking yourself in baby oil with a foil reflector, teaching kids that sunburn was a badge of honor. Nowhere in the world was sun culture more intense than Australia, and nowhere on Earth today has a higher melanoma rate. Mothers across the country would cover themselves in baby oil, sometimes mixed with a few drops of iodine, and stretch out on reflective foil blankets in the backyard. Children ran around the pool all day with zero protection, and when you peeled off giant sheets of dead skin from your shoulders a week later, it was treated as a fun summer craft project. The campaign that changed this launched in 1981, when the Anti-Cancer Council of Victoria introduced Sid the Seagull, an animated gull in board shorts who tap danced to the now legendary jingle, "Slip on a shirt, slop on sunscreen, and slap on a hat." The Slip Slop Slap campaign was written by advertising executive Philip Adams, composed by Peter Best, and illustrated by Alex Stitt. It was expanded in 2007 to add "Seek Shade and Slide" on sunglasses, and in 2023 it was inducted into the National Film and Sound Archive's Sounds of Australia Registry as the longest-running advertisement in Australian history. Adams later put it this way: "Sometimes we are able to use the devil's tools for good purpose, and it certainly took off, because melanoma is such a vast problem in our part of the world." Before Slip Slop Slap, Australian children routinely came home from the beach with blisters across their shoulders, and the parental advice was simply that it would turn into a nice tan in a few days. Number 24. Playing in, on, and around asbestos. 20% of Australian homes built between the Second World War and the 1980s contain asbestos. Children climbed through fibro sheds, played in asbestos-lined insulation lofts, and cycled under corrugated asbestos cement roofs without anyone ever mentioning the word. The real horror was a place called Wittenoom in Western Australia, a company town founded in 1947 that mined crocidolite, the blue asbestos, which is the most dangerous form on Earth. Wittenoom was operated by Australian Blue Asbestos, a subsidiary of CSR, and it supplied James Hardie with fibers for asbestos cement building products starting in 1957. Over its operating history, approximately 20,000 people lived in Wittenoom, including about 7,000 children who were either born there or brought in with their parents. One infamous photograph from the town shows two toddlers playing in a pile of asbestos dust. Both boys died of mesothelioma in their 30s. More than 2,000 workers and residents have died of asbestos-related diseases linked directly to the town, making Western Australia one of the world's mesothelioma hotspots per capita. Wittenoom was officially removed from the map in June of 2007. The Wittenoom Closure Bill passed the Western Australian Parliament in March of 2022, and the town itself was razed the same year. Number 25. Drinking straight from the garden hose in a house painted with lead and filled with leaded gasoline fumes. For most of the 20th century, every car in North America, Britain, and Australia was spewing tetraethyl lead from its tailpipe, a neurotoxin that coated every playground, schoolyard, and suburban street. The average lead content in American gasoline in 1973 was 2 to 3 grams per gallon, which added up to about 200,000 tons of lead released into the air every year. A United Nations study published in 2011 estimated that lead in fuels worldwide had historically caused 1.1 million excess deaths, 22 million lost IQ points, and $2.4 trillion in lost global GDP every single year at peak. The garden hose was its own little horror. The brass fittings connecting it to the spigot were typically soldered with lead, and the vinyl hose itself contained lead and other plasticizers that leached into the water, especially after baking in the sun all afternoon. Independent testing decades later found lead levels in water from garden hoses that exceeded EPA drinking water limits by several times over. California did not pass a law restricting toxic substances in garden hoses until 2014. The lead phase-out timeline tells its own story. Japan went first in 1986. Canada completed the switch in 1993. Britain went fully unleaded in January of 1993. The United States finished for on-road vehicles on January 1st, 1996. Australia took until January 1st, 2002. The last country on Earth, Algeria, finally phased out leaded fuel in 2021. Consumer lead paint was banned in the United States in 1978, in Australia in 1997, in Britain in 1992, and in Canada in 1991. EPA Administrator Carol Browner put the significance this way in 1995. The elimination of lead from gas was one of the great environmental achievements of all time. Blood levels of lead in American children dropped 70%, and millions of children were spared the painful consequences of permanent nerve damage, anemia, and cognitive disability. Number 26. Putting your newborn to sleep on its stomach, because that is what the pediatrician told you to do. Through the 1970s and most of the 1980s, Dr. Benjamin Spock and pediatricians across every country advised new parents to put babies to sleep on their stomachs, because the reasoning went that a prone sleeper was less likely to choke if she spit up. It was printed in parenting books. It was modeled in hospital nurseries. It was followed by millions of families without question. And it was wrong. As late as 1992, only 13% of American babies slept entirely on their backs. Dr. Davies reported in 1985 that in Hong Kong, where supine sleep was traditional, sudden infant death syndrome was a rare problem. The Netherlands ran the first back-to-sleep campaign in 1987. Britain, New Zealand, and Australia, which had the highest SADS rate of any large country at the time, launched their own campaigns in 1991. The American Academy of Pediatrics made the recommendation official in 1992. The Back to Sleep campaign launched formally in 1994 under Dr. Marion Willinger at the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, and Canada followed in 1993. American SIDS incidence has dropped by more than 50% since the campaign began. The math on this is devastating when you look at it honestly. For decades, the entire medical establishment was telling parents to do the exact thing most likely to kill their baby in the night. Now let us talk about discipline, which is where modern standards have moved the furthest from where we started. Number 27. Getting caned, strapped, or paddled by a teacher. In the 1970s, every country in this story allowed teachers to physically strike children as a matter of routine classroom management. British teachers used canes and slippers. Scottish teachers used a leather tawse manufactured in the town of Lochgelly in Fife, which is why it was called the Lochgelly tawse. Australian teachers used canes. Canadian teachers used straps. American teachers used wooden paddles, and in at least one Alabama school district, the official regulations specified the precise dimensions, which were 24 inches long, 3 inches wide, and half an inch thick. Britain's turning point came on July 22, 1986, when the House of Commons passed an amendment to the Education Act abolishing corporal punishment in state schools by a single vote, 231 to 230. The ban took effect on August 15, 1987, and Britain became the last member of the European Economic Community to ban the practice. Private schools in England and Wales were not covered until 1998, Scotland in 2000, and Northern Ireland in 2003. Australian states banned it one at a time through the 1990s and 2000s, with South Australia finally joining in 2010. New Zealand criminalized it on July 23, 1990. Canada's Supreme Court ruled in January of 2004 that teachers could no longer use corporal punishment, although Section 43 of the Criminal Code still permits parents to use reasonable physical force at home. The United States went a different direction entirely. The Supreme Court ruled in Ingraham v. Wright in 1977 that the Eighth Amendment's cruel and unusual punishment clause did not apply to schoolchildren. The case involved a Florida 8th grader named James Ingraham, who had been paddled more than 20 times by his middle school principal in October of 1970, hard enough to require medical attention. The court voted 5-4 that this was constitutional. As of 2024, corporal punishment is still legal in 17 American states, including Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Texas. Approximately 70,000 American public school students received corporal punishment during the 2017 to 2018 school year. New Jersey was the first state to outlaw it, all the way back in 1867. Idaho was the most recent, in 2023. Number 28. Being spanked in public with a belt, a wooden spoon, or a freshly cut switch from the backyard tree. Publicly disciplining a misbehaving child in a grocery store aisle, a church parking lot, or a restaurant was socially approved in the 70s and 80s. Other adults would nod at the parent as if to say, "That child will thank you one day." The phrase "spare the rod and spoil the child" was not just a proverb, it was a household principle. Canada's Section 43 of the Criminal Code, which has been on the books since 1892, still allows parents to use minor corrective physical force on children between 2 and 12, but the Supreme Court's 2004 ruling made it illegal to use any object, to strike the head, to leave bruises, or to use any physical force on a child under 2 or over 12. 17 separate private members' bills to repeal Section 43 have been introduced in Canadian Parliament since 1994, and not one of them has passed. Sweden became the first country in the world to ban parental physical discipline entirely in 1979. 65 countries have followed. The United States, Britain, Australia, and Canada are not among them. Let me close out with a few that are uniquely tied to specific countries in ways that might surprise you. Number 29. Canadian children driving snowmobiles and playing hockey without helmets. 3 specifically Canadian freedoms define childhood from Saskatoon to Quebec City. Kids aged 8 to 12 in rural Ontario, Quebec, the Prairies, and the Yukon drove ski-doos, Arctic cats, and Polaris snowmobiles on frozen lakes and back roads, usually without helmets, often without parental supervision, and frequently in temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under a minute. Canada now requires a safety course and a minimum age of around 16 for snowmobile operation on public land, with younger children only allowed on private property under adult supervision. The National Hockey League did not require helmets for new players until 1979. Grandfathered players were allowed to skip them, and the last helmetless NHL player, Craig MacTavish, finally retired in 1997. Youth hockey across Canada through the mid-1970s was routinely played without helmets, and full-face cages for minor hockey did not become mandatory until the late 1980s. Jacques Plante had introduced the goalie mask back in 1959, but it took more than a decade before most goaltenders would even consider wearing one. Number 30. British children playing in World War II bomb sites. derelict Victorian factories, and railway lines. Through the early 1970s, East London, Manchester, Liverpool, Coventry, Hull, and Plymouth all had surviving bomb sites from the Blitz, rubble patches that had never been cleared and never been redeveloped, where children built dens, climbed precarious broken walls, and occasionally found unexploded ordnance. Playing in derelict Victorian factories, climbing railway bridges, and walking along live train tracks were so common that British Rail ran a dedicated public information campaign called Never Mess About on the railway. The Play Safe films warned specifically about electrocution. Scrumping, which meant stealing apples from a neighbor's garden, was simply part of the job description of being 9 years old in Britain in 1974. A child today caught doing any of these things would trigger social services, a police report, and probably a local news segment about the collapse of parental responsibility. That was childhood in the 70s and 80s, and here is the part that nobody under 40 really wants to hear. Almost every single practice in this video was phased out, criminalized, or turned into grounds for state intervention between the late 1970s and the early 2010s. Every one of them. Within the span of a single generation, the same parents who rode in pickup beds at highway speeds, licked mercury-painted cuts, drank from lead-soldered garden hoses, and walked to school at 5 in a snowstorm became the grandparents watching their own grandchildren in 5-point harnesses, bicycle helmets, and adult organized playdates scheduled 3 weeks in advance. We drank from the garden hose. We rode without helmets. We played with toys that now live in museums of dangerous products. We climbed things that would terrify a modern safety inspector. We walked miles, crossed roads alone, bought cigarettes for our parents, and came home when the streetlights flickered on, not a minute before. It was not exactly safe. It was, by any modern legal standard, a decade of unsupervised and unapologetic independence, and somehow an entire generation of us survived long enough to sit on the couch with our phones and watch a video about how we survived. Now it is your turn. Of all the 30 things we just walked through, which one hits closest to home? Did you ride in the back of an open pickup truck on the interstate, or walk a mile to school at 5 through the snow, or get sent to the corner shop with a handwritten note and a crumpled $5 to buy your dad's cigarettes? Did you play with lawn darts, drink from a garden hose in the July heat, or stretch out in the wayback of the family station wagon on the long drive to Grandma's house? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one of them. If this trip back brought up a memory you have not thought about in 30 years, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Until next time, mind how you go.